Hey everybody, I'm Samurai Sam, and welcome to part 2 of all my Sega Genesis games. I'm going through them, and I'm going to say a little thing about each one. If you watched for the first part, you heard me say a lot like, oh, this is a cool game, but I have hardly played it, I need to play it more. There's going to be a little bit less of that in this episode. A lot more games here I see that I have spent some time with, so hopefully this episode will be a little bit different and a little bit more interesting, relevant. I don't know, make me seem like I'm not just collecting just for the sake of collecting, because I actually do like the games. So, let's just get right into it because there's a lot to go through. The first game in this part is going to be Hook. This is obviously a licensed game based on the movie. It's a side-scroller, and I actually never saw the movie. Obviously, I saw the Disney Peter Pan, but I have never seen Hook. But this is a pretty decent game regardless. I'm sure people, kids or teenagers, whoever, who like the movie enjoyed this game. It's a solid platformer, action platformer kind of game, and I guess the main thing I would complain about is that it's really short. It's very, very short, but it's fun. Probably the Super Nintendo and Sega CD versions are better, though, because of better quality music. We've got Jerry Glanville's Pigskin Footbrawl. Now, this is a arcadey, non-traditional football game by Midway that takes place, as you can see, in like kind of a medieval setting. I think it's supposed to be like Vikings or something. But it's very different from regular football because there's no huddles. Like, the ball just keeps going and going until somebody scores. And it's a fun little two-player game, particularly. The endorsement of Jerry Glanville is a little bit weird to me because this is not a realistic sports game. Why would you need, like, a real football coach to endorse it? I feel like the game would just kind of sell itself. But anyway, I recommend this if you have a friend to play with. Single player is probably not worth it, but multiplayer is definitely fun. Jurassic Park, this is a side-scroller platformer action game. One thing that's cool about Jurassic Park for Sega Genesis is that you can actually play as the Raptor if you want, instead of just Dr. Grant, I think his name is. And, yeah, that's a pretty fun little thing. I mean, it's not really an exceptional game, but if you like big dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, I'm sure if you were a kid back in the 90s, then this was a lot of fun. It does uses the license pretty well. You have Kid Chameleon. This is actually a pretty long game. There's an awful lot of levels. One thing that's a little bit disappointing is that there's no save or password feature, although there is a cheat code that you can skip levels with. But you can get a whole bunch of different power-ups in this game. It's a platformer, and I haven't played it a lot. I played it a little bit, and it seems pretty cool. I'm not sure where I would rank it in platformers of that era, but it seems like it's probably worth it if you like platformers. Landstalker, and this is a isometric adventure game, kind of Zelda-ish. There's some platforming here. It can be a little frustrating because of the isometric perspective, but that's not all there is. It's not just a platformer. There's puzzle solving and combat and stuff. And I really haven't played this one a lot, and I definitely want to. People who made this went on to make Alundra on PlayStation and Dark Savior on Sega Saturn, among other things. Here is Lightning Force, the Quest for the Dark Star, shoot 'em up. It's actually in the Thunder Force series. For some reason, they decided to change the name for this one. It has somewhat of a non-linear progression, whereas you can choose kind of the order of the first few levels. And it's a fast-paced and fun shooter. I have played it some, but I have not managed to actually beat it yet. I will someday. It's a cool game, good soundtrack. One of the better shooters on a system with a lot of shooters. Madden 95, I mean, it's a Madden game. It's a quality football game from the era. I'm not super familiar with this version all by myself, but I haven't played this particular version a lot, but I know the Genesis Madden games are held in high regard. We have McDonald's Treasureland Island, which is a licensed game, obviously, from Treasure, the people who made stuff like Gunstar Heroes and Dynamite Headdy. And so this game also has a pretty good reputation, and I really need to play it more. It's a platformer, and it seems to be pretty creative and fun, like most of Treasure's games are. But I have not really played a lot of it. We have Mercs. This is a top-down arcadey, seems like kind of running gun sort of thing. Well, not really running gun. It's more like a top-down progressive, top-down arcade style kind of shooter, I guess. But not like kind of like a Smash TV kind of shooter, I think. But I haven't really played this one a lot. I can't really give a solid opinion. We have Mickey Mania, The Timeless Adventures of Mickey Mouse. I'm going to be honest with you, I actually forgot I even had this. But, yeah, a lot of the Mickey Mouse games around the area were pretty good. And this is probably not the best version of it. There's a Sega CD version, there's a PlayStation version that unfortunately wasn't released in America. But, yeah, I mean, if you like Mickey Mouse, you like platformers, you're probably going to enjoy this game too. Here's another European import. We have Micro Machines 96 Turbo Tournament. I am not really sure why this didn't get released in America, but it did not. And thankfully, though, this is a completely region-free game. It works on an American Genesis. They're fun, top-down racers, and they take place in kind of basically everyday kind of settings. Only, obviously, everything's really big because you're really small cars. You're kind of playing as remote control cars, sort of, or different varieties of remote control vehicles. One thing that's cool about this game is that the cartridge has additional controller ports on it. So you have to go out and buy a multi-tap in order to play with more than 2 players. You can just hook your controllers right into the cartridge. That's really cool. Ooh, we got a big one coming up here. We have, if I can just, okay. We've got Mortal Kombat. Now, this was a very big deal when it came out. In arcades, obviously, largely because of violence, and it was very popular, and really people were just starting to come to grips with violence in video games and such, and caused a lot of controversy. This Super Nintendo and Sega versions came later. The Sega version has a code in it where you could unlock the violence from the arcade version, whereas the Super Nintendo version did not, and so this was actually a pivotal game in Sega's favor back then, with this version being more popular. This version plays better than the Super Nintendo version in terms of comparison to the arcade. It's just smoother, better controls. I'm actually kind of partial to the Super Nintendo version just because that's the one I got used to playing. Super Nintendo version definitely has better graphics and sound, but if you're just talking about gameplay, this is better. Not much of a reason to go back to this version now, though, with better arcade ports in existence that have pretty much the graphics of the Super Nintendo version with the gameplay that you would hope for. Mutant League Football, a very fun, non-traditional football game from Electronic Arts. And basically, it kind of plays like Madden, but with a lot of silly stuff, a lot of like dirty plays and hazards on the field and humor and stuff. And I like this game a lot. Good multiplayer game, obviously. And the game actually comes with a lot of extras in here, other than just the manual, like trading cards and stuff. And cool game. There's also Mutant League Hockey, but I don't have that one, unfortunately. That one's kind of expensive, and I haven't been motivated to actually buy it yet. Mystic Defender. This is a game I might get rid of, I'm not sure. This is a game I've actually had for a very, very long time. But it's a... who made this game? I don't remember who made it. But it's a side-scroll. I think this is actually a licensed game in Japan. It's a side-scrolling action game. You have like a charge shot, and you fight things. And it's pretty... not bad, but kind of forgettable. It's just kind of a whatever side-scrolling platformer action game, in my opinion. We've got a couple of NBA Live games. We've got NBA Live 95 and 96. Yeah, and I haven't played these a lot, but they seemed like good, solid basketball sims. And one thing that I thought weird compared to from 96 to 95 is that in 95, when you're starting a game, it shows all the characters with their portraits. So like you can see what their actual face looks like. In 96, they took that out, and I'm like, why? That was a really cool part of the presentation, but whatever. I mean, the gameplay's still good, so I don't know, it probably makes up for it in other ways. Joe Montana 93 Sports Talk Football. Now, this game was probably pretty mind-blowing back when it first came out. I mean, I can't personally speak to it, but this was one of the first games to ever have like play-by-play announcing, and it was actually pretty decent for that time. Obviously, doesn't hold a candle to play-by-play in today's sports games, but back then, people probably really, really liked this when they first heard it, or at least some people did. Keeping up with the sports, we've got 3 NHL games. We've got... let me do this here. NHL 94, 95, and 96, and this is not all the NHL games on the system. NHL 94 in particular is highly regarded as one of the greatest hockey video games of all time. I kind of want to get into these, but I've always really been bad at these games. I have a really hard time scoring. I've never really gotten the hang of it. But yeah, they have good reputations for good reason. People like hack the games and update the rosters every year for NHL 94. I'm not sure if NHL 94 is actually better than 95 and 96. I guess that's what most fans of the series have decided. There's probably good reasons for that. I'm not really sure what they are. We have Phantasy Star 4, which is often considered the best, or at least one of the best RPGs on the system. Futuristic, obviously a lot of homages to the first few games in the series. And really solid gameplay, graphics, music, everything. And really good presentation too, like playing this compared to a couple of the games, RPGs released like on Super Nintendo that year. like Breath of Fire and like what's another one? Like there's a couple. I remember playing a couple RPGs released around the same time. And like, whoa, Phantasy Star Force presentation just blows those games out of the water. Way better localization than those games. Very good. I didn't like grow up with Phantasy Star Force, so there's. Well, actually, I didn't really grow up with a lot of RPGs in general. I guess I don't really have like a deep love for Phantasy Star 4 the way some people do, but I definitely respect it. I've beaten it. It's a good, solid game. We have Pitfall, the Mayan adventure platformer. Obviously, it's it has the original Pitfall in it. Yeah, Pitfall, as you saw in episode 1, was one of the pioneers when it comes to platform games. This is kind of a spiritual successor. I remember playing this as a kid like once or twice, and I mean, I don't think it's like a really great game or anything. But someday I'll probably play it a little more and find out if I really like it. This is probably not the optimal version, though. There's versions on 32X, Super Nintendo, and Sega CD, and what have you. So, I don't know, maybe I'll get rid of that version if I get my hands on one of those. Pirates Gold is a port/remake. I think enhanced port might be the right word for a popular PC game. It was kind of an open-world pirate simulator, and it's a very highly regarded, very well-made game. I haven't played a lot. This is not a type of game that I tend to play very much, but I am kind of intrigued by this one. And we'll see if I can get hooked on it like some people really are. But yeah, you can basically do whatever you want. You can take a more barbaric approach and just try to conquer everything, or you can try diplomacy or whatever, and it is done very well. You got Rystar, as I like to pronounce it. This game, a lot of people disagree on how to pronounce it. There's no official pronunciation, but I like Rystar. And I mean, on the back it says catch a rising star, so Rystar, that seems logical. But anyway, this is a platformer, and you play as this star dude with hands and feet. And you can grab stuff. The game really revolves around grabbing stuff. You have like a grab button, and like most of the combat and such revolves around that. I've heard that this is actually kind of a imagining of the scrapped ideas for Sonic the Hedgehog. I think they originally conceived that Sonic is kind of playing like this, and this game is actually very good. Great graphics, great levels, very challenging at times too, and plenty of secrets to find. I will say though, the last boss was a pain. I really didn't like the last boss very much. He was cheap, but I did beat the game. It's a very good game. Recommended for your Genesis library. We have Road Rash. Hold on, I have Road Rash 1 and Road Rash 3, but not 2. These are motorcycle racing games. I've played some of them. They're pretty good games. I've never really gotten serious about playing them. I've always kind of only ever played them casually. Basically, it's not just your racing, but also there's a combat aspect because you can like attack with a stick and try to beat down the other racers. You can get in trouble with the cops, and they can pull you over and stuff. And you can see a funny cutscene of your guy getting busted. Road Blasters, which I also have for NES, which you saw in a previous episode if you watched that. And I think it's a racer of some kind of it's a driving game, obviously, and you can actually shoot things to get them out of your way and stuff. So it's non-traditional. It's originally an arcade game. I'm not sure how this version stacks up compared to the arcade, but it's considered to be a solid game. Rocket Knight Adventures, another platformer that is held very much in high regard by the Genesis and Mega Drive faithful. It's by Konami, which is always a good sign. Konami made a lot of great stuff back then. Basically, you have a sword, and you can also charge up and do a rocket boost and like zoom in like whatever direction you want as long as you charge it up. And really good gameplay and level design. The first time I played this game, I actually didn't like it that much, and I thought like it was kind of cheap. But like the second and third time I played it, I liked it a lot more and realized that it is actually quite a good game. Definitely recommended. Shadow Dancer, The Secret of Shinobi. This is in the Shinobi series. I haven't played this one a whole lot. I think this was originally an arcade game, but I think they changed this version a lot. You have a dog companion that you can send after your enemies. It's one-hit deaths. I think that's different than the rest of the Shinobi games. And I can't say too much about this one. I think this is not considered one of the best Shinobi games, but still seems pretty cool. We got Shadowrun, which is kind of a, what's the word, steampunk, I guess. I don't know if futuristic works, but kind of that kind of a game. I think it's based on Shadowrun, like a tabletop series or something. And basically you can choose one of a few different classes. And it's kind of an open-ended game where you can kind of do whatever you want and build up your classes. I think this game starts out kind of slow, but then once you start like really building your character, I think it really gets, I've heard it really gets a lot more interesting and fun. And yeah, I'll have to spend some time with this one. This is a game that takes some time investment to really get the most out of. Oh boy, this next game we got here, it's Shaq Fu. This game is infamous and also known. People kind of like it in a way as well. It's not a very good game. It doesn't play very well. It's basically a 2D fighter, and the Genesis version over the Super Nintendo version has some playable characters that the Super Nintendo version does not. And it's not a good game, but it's kind of an interesting collection piece, fun little conversation topic. Everybody likes to chuckle at Shaq Fu. We have Shining Force and Shining Force 2. These are strategy RPGs, and they seem to take inspiration from Fire Emblem back in the day, but they're also quite different. Like, instead of controlling your entire team and moving each unit one at a time, every individual unit gets a turn. And the Shining Force games have a lot of charm and interesting characters, and they're fun. Shining Force 1 is definitely worse than 2. There's a lot of maps in this one that really are kind of a slog, and it feels a little bit unpolished. 2 is a lot better. Shining Force 2 has this one character you can get that is really overpowered, but despite being overpowered, that one character can only do so much, so this game is actually quite challenging. I remember kind of struggling getting through it in terms of difficulty, but it's a very good game. Definitely worth it if you like strategy RPGs at all. Shinobi 3, Return of the Ninja Master. Obviously, it's a Shinobi game, and this is probably the best Shinobi game of all of them. Really quality action platforming. You've got magic spells. You have a whole bunch of shurikens. You can actually customize how many you start the game with, I guess, for difficulty purposes. But really good level design, boss fights, everything. It's just a solid game all around. Recommended. Soldiers of Fortune. I played this one a little bit. It's a top-down kind of shoot. I always struggle with how to actually name these games. I guess action game where you shoot stuff, because it's not a shmup. It's not a shoot 'em up. But tried playing some of this co-op, and it didn't seem that great, but I also wasn't that good at it. It's not really arcadey. It feels more like a console game, meaning that it's like less about just straight action, and like there's stuff about like acquiring resources and all that you would expect to see in a console game, and like there's different playable characters that have different attributes and such. Didn't leave really a great impression on me, but I'll give it another shot at some point. Sonic Spinball. This is a game I played a lot in my youth, but never really got very far. This is a fun little merging of Sonic the Hedgehog gameplay and pinball gameplay. And my main gripe with this game is that it's really just too short. It's only like, 4 levels, 5 levels? It's really, really short. You can beat it in less than an hour if you know what you're doing. And despite that, I didn't beat it for years and years for some reason. But I really like it a lot, and obviously it has nostalgia for me, so definitely worthy part of my collection. And now we get to, oh boy, the Sonic the Hedgehog regular. I'm not saying that right. We're getting to the mainline Sonic the Hedgehog games. Let's start with the very first Sonic the Hedgehog. So this was the game that catapulted Sega and the Genesis to mainstream popularity. Really, Genesis had been out for a couple years before this, but this is the game that really shot it up and put it equal, and even maybe it's for some time past the Super Nintendo. Really very distinct from Mario, which had been number one at the time for platformers. A lot of speed, kind of attitude. You see Sonic, if you like put the controller down, Sonic gets like kind of peeved at you, kind of annoyed, and there was kind of the cool game. Like Mario was the game for babies, and Sonic was the game for the cool teenagers. And Sonic the Hedgehog 1 is the game I played the most as a kid, so I kind of have the most nostalgia for this one. Even though I know it's not the best one, I still think it's a very good game. I love the levels, and I love the music, and it's just a really great classic game, timeless in my opinion, even though it's not the best in the series. And we have Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which I also played a lot as a kid, and 2 is considered by many to be the best one. That's not my opinion, but it's definitely a really great game. I also enjoyed a lot over the years, and better multiplayer in this one because player 2 can control Tails. There's also versus modes. Actually, the first game didn't have multiplayer at all. What am I saying? So obviously this one is better multiplayer, but I have some good memories playing multiplayer in this. More fun levels and bosses, and just still a very inspired, good quality classic game. This one also added the famous spin dash, where you hold down and press the dash button to you can dash from just a standing position, whereas you couldn't do that in the first game. This is, a really great classic game. Highly recommended if you've somehow never played it, which I'm sure you have. Now, Sonic 3, I actually didn't play much as a kid, maybe like once or twice. Sonic 3, kind of is even, like, the levels got even bigger from Sonic 2. You can really get lost in some of these. Michael Jackson worked on a lot of this, helped work on the soundtrack for this game, so the music continues to be really good and kind of distinct from the first two. But that's okay because it's very good music. I don't like Sonic 3 quite as much as the first two. Maybe nostalgia is part of that, but I didn't find the levels quite as great as the first. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't blown away by Sonic 3, I guess is what I have to say. But what I did really like is Sonic and Knuckles, which is kind of Sonic 3 Part 2. It was originally meant to be like one game together, but then for, I guess, development release deadlines and such, they had to release them as two separate games. And this actually has a different looking cartridge where you can actually put another cartridge on top of this one. So you can actually play Sonic 3 and Knuckles together as it was originally intended with this lock-on technology. And I really, really loved Sonic and Knuckles when I first beat it. I think I first beat it in like 2012. Like, I waited way too long to play it. But I think it's a lot better than Sonic 3. Of course, Sonic 3 and Knuckles together is kind of one game. So I guess I would say that would be my favorite Sonic game, even though I don't really have a lot of nostalgia for it, which is really saying something. But, like, you can play as Sonic, Knuckles, or Tails. And there's a lot of levels, and they're really, really fun and long and fun to explore in. And there's a lot of fun gameplay variety. There's, like, different power-ups you can get that weren't in the previous games. And, Sonic and Knuckles, I think I would say is my favorite Sega Genesis game in general. We have Sparkster, which is the sequel to Rocket Knight Adventures, which we saw a little earlier. This one kind of changes the way that the rocket boost works, whereas you don't have to hold down the button to get the boost. It just charges automatically. And I really like this game a lot. I actually think this is my favorite of the three retro Sparkster games. And it has like a kind of a thing where there are 7 special items you can find in the middle of the game. If you find them all, you get like this is the true ending. I have beaten the game, but I haven't done that. I'll do that someday, like on a subsequent playthrough, I guess. But another great platformer from Konami, highly recommended. Spider-Man and Venom Spider-Man and Venom in Maximum Carnage. This is a beat 'em up and kind of with a comic look to it, and fun game. Definitely does very well with the license. It's not my favorite genre of games, but and I've never really fully indulged in this one, but in my short time ever playing it, I have enjoyed it and found it to be definitely good for people who like Spider-Man and such, or beat 'em ups in general. Seems to be an above-average beat 'em up. Here's Starflight. This is another very open-ended kind of PC-style game from back then. Only, as you might imagine, this is a spaceship simulator, basically. Like, it's almost like being in Star Trek, I guess, only less of a like plot that you have to rigidly follow, and more like fly around the galaxy and kind of do whatever you want. I haven't played this one a lot either, and I am interested to see if I can get into it, which maybe I won't, but maybe I will. Another heavy hitter from back then, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. So this Genesis version, I'm going to assume you already know what Street Fighter is. I mean, it's one of the most popular, influential games of the early 90s, pioneer in the 2D fighting genre. This version, it's not as good as the Super Nintendo versions for sure. The Genesis controller, you also definitely want to have a 6-button Genesis controller, otherwise you have to press the start button to switch between punches and kicks, because there's just not enough buttons on the controller. But, I mean, it's still on its own. It's a great game. Still has the great gameplay that everybody loves. Streets of Rage 2, I don't have 1 and 3. This game is a beat-em-up, and beat-em-ups are not really, like, my preference, but one thing that makes Streets of Rage worth playing is the excellent soundtrack. It's clearly one of the better games in the beat-em-up genre. Fun game for 2 players. Definitely recommended if beat-em-ups appeal to you. It's because it's one of the best the genre has to offer. We have Subterranea, which at first glance kind of looks like a shoot-em-up, but it's not really that. It has kind of space gravity mechanics. Or no, actually not quite. Like, it has gravity mechanics, so like you have to hold down the thrusters in order to actually move up. It's that kind of game, and then when you stop, you're going to fall down. Your ship is going to just like fall downward. So you kind of have to deal with that. It's kind of unique in that way. But it's not like a scrolling shoot-em-up. You can like freely roam around levels and stuff. I've never really played it a lot, but it seems like an interesting game. Here's The Adventures of Batman and Robin. This game has some of the best graphics I've ever seen on the Genesis. You can play it 1 or 2 players. I guess you'd call it a beat-em-up. It's kind of a side-scrolling action game. some really long levels, and it's also a pretty difficult game. It's not like the best action game on the Genesis, but again, uses the license well and really, really impressive graphics at times. You're gonna have to look that up for yourself to know what I'm talking about. The humans, this game is kind of inspired by Lemmings, if you have any idea what that is, I think. Basically, well, it's quite different than Lemmings. Basically, there's these little humans things, these little like cavemen kind of characters that stand around. They all have like different abilities, I think, and you have to use them properly in order to get through the levels. And so it's sort of like Lemmings in that way, but less so that I don't think it's so much that you're trying to guide them all to the exit and trying to keep them from dying. It's more just focusing on the aspect of using different abilities to solve puzzles and get through levels. Seems like an interesting game. I haven't played it a lot. The Lion King platformer, I played it in my teen years quite a bit, but never actually really got super far in it. Yeah, another great use of the license. Really brings the voices from the movie and the graphics kind of look like they're just straight from the movie, and it's really done well. As a kid, I would have really loved this game, probably, because I love the movie. Obviously, everybody loves Lion King. But there are some levels that are frustrating, annoying, unfair as well. So it's not like one of the best platformers of the era, but again, really good licensed game. We have The Lost Vikings, which I guess I'll talk about more on Super Nintendo because that's the one that I actually played. It's basically a game where you control 3 Vikings throughout the whole game, and they each have their own abilities, and you switch between them. Or you and a friend can also control them simultaneously and switch that way. The Genesis version, I don't think the music is as good, but it also has at least a couple exclusive levels that are only in this version. So that's one reason to own this one. Here's a very early Genesis game, The Revenge of Shinobi, side-scrolling action game. Saying that a lot today. The controls are the jumping controls are a little weird. You have a double jump you can do, but you have to be very precise with the timing, and that can get a little annoying. But this is still a good game. It's got some good music, and you got like shurikens and magic spells you can use, and those are fun. One thing interesting about this game is that it has some licensed characters in it. Like there's a Spider-Man boss, there's a Spider-Man and Batman boss. I think he starts as one and like turns into the other or something like that. And there's a Godzilla boss. Later versions of this game had those characters removed to more generic characters. But I believe this one has the licensed characters intact, so I'm happy to have that. Thunder Force 3 is a quality shoot-'em-up, ported from the arcade, I believe. I think this one also has kind of a non-linear structure, but yeah, it's a fast-paced, good music, solid gameplay. Yeah, it's a good. It's a horizontal shoot-'em-up. I always have to like stop for a second and remember which way is horizontal, which way is vertical. But it's yeah, like Lightning Force, which I already showed you, which is the 4th game. It's comparable to that, obviously. And if you like shoot-'em-ups, you will probably like this game. Here's Tin Head, which is a platformer where you play as Tin Head, and you can shoot this metal ball out of your head and attack enemies with it. And that's the main, I guess, gimmick or feature of this game. And I haven't played it a lot, and I want to. I don't think it's one of the best platformers on the system, but it's a good one. Here's Toe Jam and Earl, another famous game from the era. This is kind of a dungeon crawler sort of game, even though it doesn't really look like it in terms of the setting. And you can, basically you wander around levels and try to find pieces of your ship. And once you find them all, you beat the game. And there are gifts that do things, they're kind of like power-ups, but like, you usually don't know what they are at first, and then you have to use them and find out what they are. And there's a bunch of enemies that get in your way. And one thing that's cool about this game is that in addition to playing the main game, you can also play completely randomly generated worlds and levels. So you can basically have a lot of replay value. And really this game, I highly recommend playing this with a second player co-op, because single player can get a little bit boring in my opinion, and it's a lot slower with one player. So, but it's still a classic game. Definitely recommend it if you have a buddy to play with. Then there's the sequel, Toe Jam and Earl and Panic on Funkotron. This was probably my favorite Genesis game as a kid. I played it a lot back then, even though there was a part that I was never able to get past. And this is completely different than the first game. It's a platformer, and basically your goal is to capture all the Earthlings in jars in each level by throwing the jars at them. And a lot of personality to this game. It's very fun. A lot of enemies that are amusing. Some good humor here, and again, it also has co-op play, which was not common for platformers back then. Definitely recommend this one. It gets a little bit of a bad rap, I think, from some people because it's not like the first game. But I'm like, I don't care. Who cares? As long as it's a good game, who cares? Tommy Lasorda Baseball. This was a launch title for the Genesis and one of their series of celebrity-endorsed sports games, which helped launch the system off on a good foot because some games before that often didn't have endorsements like this, and that gave them trouble standing out. And I haven't played a lot of Tommy Lasorda Baseball, but it seems pretty solid. We've got Vector Man, which is a game that has, I think it has like an environmentalist kind of message to it. It's got impressive graphics. It kind of came out around the same time as Donkey Kong Country, I think. It was not nearly as popular as Donkey Kong Country. Probably not as good either. But it's kind of a run and gun-ish sort of game, although a little bit more emphasis on like exploration, I think. Really good graphics and some variety in gameplay as well. I've never played this game a lot, but I've played it a little bit. It seems pretty good. Not like one of the best, but good. There's also a second one, which I unfortunately don't have. We have Warsong, which is the only game in the Langrisser series that has been released in America to this date. It's a strategy RPG. It's a little slow-paced, which is kind of annoying. Kind of hard to play it if you're not patient. But, yeah, I've played like a few battles in this, but not too much further. Seems like a pretty good game, but you have to have patience in order to play it. And, like, you can, like, basically every level you buy, like, minions to surround your main commanders of your army, and like there's a kind of a rock paper scissors thing going on, and I think it's a quality game. Just there's probably better entries in the series. We have Wiz and Liz, which I have played this game some. I played the multiplayer. I think this game involves, if I remember right, like collecting rabbits or something and bringing them to an exit. It's a good multiplayer game. Yeah, I did definitely play this game for some time, but like I'm kind of struggling to remember a lot of it. It's considered a good game. Yeah, I think it's about like collecting rabbits. Yeah, it says it right here in the box. Okay, so you get points and there's also other things too, like you can collect ingredients for spells, and yeah, it is a good game. World Series Baseball, which I honestly can't say a lot about other than this is considered a quality baseball game. It has play-by-play. And yeah, I like baseball games, so I'm glad to have this. So I will play it at some point and be more familiar with, I guess, be able to give more of a critique. Here's X-Men 2. We looked at X-Men 1 in the first one. I don't think this one has any gimmicks like that reset gimmick from the first one. But yeah, you can play as multiple X-Men. And one thing, if I remember right, that's unique about this game is that you turn it on, there's no like copyright screen or anything. It just dumps you right into the game as a random character, which is kind of amusing. But yeah, it's a pretty fun game. Again, another game that uses the license well and will be enjoyed by people who like that license. And now the last game of this episode is going to be Zero Wing, which is a Mega Drive game, a European import, which again works perfectly fine on American Sega Genesises. And this game is a shoot 'em up. And it's very famous for its bad English and its opening cutscene. All your base are belong to us. And there was a time where I saw people claiming this was some kind of awful game because of the bad translation, which that's really not true. Actually, the gameplay is pretty solid. It's not really anything all that special as far as shoot 'em up is concerned, but it's certainly more than just adequate. It's actually a pretty fun game. And that's going to do it for this episode. I could try and cram in the Sega CD and 32X games, but I think I'm going to not and save those for later. Stay tuned. Game Boy is coming up next.